Leave her alone, Jungkook. Vine's eyes blazed with anger as she took her anger out on Jungkook, her voice firm and commanding. Jungkook, who was sitting in the classroom, chilling with his useless friends, looked at her with narrowed eyes, unable to understand her. Looking at Vine, his friends moved to their seats, and Jungkook looked at her. What problem do you have with me now? The papers she had in her hands, she threw them on Jungkook's face. Everyone was shocked. No one ever dared to even raise a voice on the one and only heir of the Jeon Empire. But Vine doesn't care as long as it's about her friend. Vine. This is what I'm talking about. Jungkook looked at the papers and his name was written on it. It was the computer science assignment that he made Erica to write it for him. Vine's friend Erica. As soon as Vine saw it in Erica's hand, she was furious and came here immediately. Erica couldn't speak against Jungkook. No one ever could, except her. And he doesn't even say anything to her in return, as he likes her. That's why he asked Erica to never tell Vine about this. Jungkook scoffed after looking at the papers. I told that brat not to tell you. Vine looked at him with furious eyes and raised her finger against him as she said, I'm warning you, Jungkook. If you ever even come close to her, I won't sit quiet. She said as she looked in his eyes, and they had a tension full of eye contact for some seconds. Both not the ones to back down. Their chemistry intense, and then she turned to leave, but Jungkook held her wrist, turning her towards himself. She fell in his embrace, and he looked in her eyes. Why do you seem to hate everything I do? Can't you see how much I like you? He whispered, his eyes red as they burned with the longing of having her. Leave me before I slap you in front of everyone, she said, but Jungkook didn't flinch. She herself pulled back, getting rid of his grip, and faced him head on. You do everything that makes me hate you. How can you even say you like me? I will never like someone like you. She said and turned back, leaving Jungkook alone with his racing thoughts. The last sentence hurt him, deep down. He took a deep breath as he saw her leaving and kicked the chair that was in front of him with full force and left the classroom. Jungkook was furious, angry, his veins boiling, not because of the fact that she doesn't like him, but because she hates him. She hates everything he does, and he knew he will have to change if he wants to get her. And he is willing to. Vine was taking her stuff out of the locker, and her skirt got entangled between the door of the locker when she closed it. Not knowing about it, she turned to leave, but she heard her skirt tearing off from the back, the sound echoing through the hallway like a clear taunt. She tried to move, but her skirt was tangled in the locker door. She stayed glued to it. The laughter from her classmates was like a wave of humiliation crashing down on her. Jungkook, watching all this, strode towards Vine. He took the locker keys from her hand and opened the locker. As soon as he did it, Vine started shaking there, knowing he will never leave such a chance like this to humiliate her in front of everyone. But as her skirt was free from the locker, he took off his coat and tried to wrap it around her thighs. But she took a step back, although there was no space to. He stopped, his eyes looking at her vulnerability, and he handed his coat to her. As shocked as she was, she heard his loud voice. "Shut up, all of you," he growled, his voice commanding silence. "Can't you see she is embarrassed enough?" The laughter died down, and the students looked away, shamefaced. Vine's face was crimson, her eyes brimming with tears. Jungkook's coat enveloped her like a protective embrace, in the midst of his soft voice only for her. "Let me drop you home," Jungkook whispered. His eyes carried care of her, for her, instead of the badness she expected. Vine shook her head. "I can go by myself." Jungkook's eyes narrowed. "I'm not doing it for you. I want my coat back." Vine looked at him for some seconds before she nodded, her eyes downcast. He started walking, but he stopped when she called him. "Jungkook," Vine demanded, and he turned back to her. "Vine, thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jungkook's expression softened. His eyes filled with a deep understanding. But he didn't say anything in return and walked away, followed by Vine. As she walked, her head held high, Jungkook's coat still wrapped around her thighs. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. The tension between them was palpable, a spark waiting to ignite. As they walked home, the silence between them was palpable, yet not uncomfortable. Vine's eyes were cast down, her face still flushed from the earlier embarrassment. Jungkook also stayed silent, knowing that she was embarrassed. As they reached her house, Jungkook looked at her and asked, "I will wait here. Go and get my coat back." Vine stayed silent for a few seconds, not knowing she was the one thinking about this. "Jungkook," she hesitated, "have lunch before you go." Jungkook was about to refuse her, but in the meantime, her mother opened the door and saw Jungkook with her. "Vine, Mom, this is Jungkook, my friend. I invited him for lunch." Jungkook looked at her with amusing eyes, and her mother asked him to come inside. Jungkook hesitated for a moment before nodding, his eyes never leaving Vine's face. Vine's mother followed them into the dining room, where a delicious spread of Korean dishes awaited them. After Vine changed, they sat down to eat, and Vine's mother excused herself. "Vine, remember the function I told you about? I'm going there with your father. You have to clean the dishes after this, okay?" Vine sighed, and her mother left. "Jungkook, your mother is a savage, just like you." "Vine, and so many things as well. You want me to show you?" "Jungkook, I would love to." "Fine, you're hopeless." She finally smiled, and as long as he remembers it, it was the first time she smiled because of him. Jungkook's heart fluttered seeing her, and he smiled as he kept looking at her, while she was busy filling her mouth. After lunch, Vine got up to use the bathroom, but she suddenly screamed. Her voice pierced the air, making Jungkook jump from his seat. He quickly rushed inside her room. Wine. What's wrong? He called out, rushing towards the bathroom. She flung open the door, her eyes wide with fear, and launched herself at Jungkook, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. There's a cockroach in there, she whispered, her voice trembling. Jungkook's racing heart came to a rest as he turned to her with an annoying face. Seriously? Vine turned him back and hugged him again. Fine. Kill it, please. Jungkook shook her head and his eyes scanned the bathroom as he took in some steps inside, but he couldn't find it. Jungkook, there is nothing here. Vine, it was here, she said, and then suddenly screamed as she saw it again. Fine. It's at the door, she said, and held Jungkook tightly, and Jungkook immediately closed the door. They were inside the washroom, while the cockroach outside. Jungkook held her hands and said to her, "You can ease out now. It went away." Vine opened her eyes and saw it for herself. When she couldn't find it, she realized that she was holding Jungkook all this time. She immediately left him and cleared her throat. Fine. Where did it go? Jungkook. Outside, at the door. And there she went, holding him again as tight as she could. Fine. Why wouldn't it just leave me? She fake cried, making Jungkook laugh at her. Vine was already furious, so she slapped his arm. Jungkook. Okay. Stay back. I will open the door and Vine tightened his grip against her as she immediately cut him off. No, please. Jungkook sighed and turned back. He held her shoulders and took her to the bathtub, which was away from the door. He looked in her eyes and said, "Trust me, it won't come to you. I won't let it. Stay here." She looked back in his eyes and couldn't say anything as she was lost. He went to the door and slowly moved the doorknob, but the door didn't open. He moved it forcefully only to find out it was locked. Jungkook, why is the door not opening? He asked, looking at her. To be continued.